Welcome, everybody. It is finals day here at the April Officer Club Clash. We are going to see Jinlin versus Uwumoy in just a bit, but before that, we have Jking here to cast his own third place game against No5. I think the most interesting part about this, having you, Jking, and you, Berto, with us here is, I believe if the math works out, if Jking wins the third place series, he will go ahead of you, Berto, in the standings for the ultimate. If he loses, I believe he ends up behind you. I think that math is correct. So hopefully we'll have some, friendly banter throughout this series, just to make it a little bit more lively before the ultimate next week.
Well, I also could have been higher seed every time if I just submitted decks for top 38. But
so
I did make top 38 last season, but I decided, whatever, I'm already in, and I didn't submit decks I didn't play in the qualifiers, which means I didn't get the 4 points, which I didn't realize I wasn't getting. So I should have been at 34 points even if I went 0-4 and in the qualifiers.
You literally could have submitted decks, shown up, and forfeited every single game and gotten your 4 points. I mean, I believe it was when we were starting yesterday, I called Jking the hardest working person in cards, and you called yourself the laziest person in cards. I think that might be coming to fruition. I think you might have been spot on.
Granted, I would have had to waken up in the morning if I wanted to do that. So,
Waking up for 9 a.m. is too hard for Berto.
It's a pretty big commitment, yeah. for 4 OCC points, whatever.
You're going to be there no matter what, right? Just going to depend on what ranking. And Jaking's got to put in the work. He's still got to win this next matchup that we're about to see. So let's get into it. Let's find out what's going to happen here. Berto, we had you tear down Jaking's mess of a dumpster fire of deck lists. So let's have Jking walk us through his in the proper manner this time around.
All right, so as Bubbles mentioned, I was really looking at targeting these discard decks that unfortunately there was not a lot of them in this tournament. So this first deck is a US-German frontline deck, which I've made 4 card changes to it, which doesn't sound like a lot, but if you look at the deck, it looks very, very different than the ones I've brought to tournaments in the past. I took out 2 Greyhounds for 2 M4A1s, which is quite a big difference. That's going to help pack a bit more of a punch against control and especially discard, since the M4A1 is drawn when a card is discarded from my hand. However, those Greyhounds are going to be very sorely missed against decks like Air or Jagro or the Miro, decks that are faster paced where you want a 1-3 blitzer. And the other card I took out is the 2 copies of Blitzkrieg in exchange for US Research and Island Hopping, which are both going to give this deck a significant increase in overall value that it can get out of its cards. Which, again, going to help very much against control, not so much against aggro. Then my second deck is a pretty straightforward Japan-German Feigned Retreat list, with the one interesting thing I would say is this single copy of Panzer H. This is a bit of a call-out for discard, just making it slightly more likely you find your erratas, you find Feigned Retreat. But also, I just think it's all around a pretty solid card in other matchups as well, since knowing what's at the bottom of your deck after you play Feigned Retreat, if you're drawing through your entire deck, having a slightly better idea of the order of it is going to give you more information, and more information is always helpful. And the last deck is Soviet France, which this one is actually more similar to the other two. It's more intended to be control. I'm not running the Scorched Earths at all. However, I am running still 3 Bryansk, 2 Petliakov, so it can handle US frontline, but it's going to be relatively weak to Jagro and absolutely atrocious against air. However, 2 Spy Wings and a decent amount of removal, decent amount of threats. This can go toe-to-toe with any control deck. So, all around, I think it's a pretty solid lineup. Looking at how much air there was versus discard, I probably would have brought something different, but it's gotten me this far.
Absolutely, and gives you the opportunity to tinker a little bit more before the ultimate next week. So let's see exactly what your opponent No5 is bringing. Berto, take us through it.
All right, well, we've got Air here, which is a pretty good deck. You should try it sometimes, Jking. And of course, we have the more standard version of US Germany mid-range. and this Soviet-US ramp. So I don't know if I want to say that I'm hoping for the Soviet mirror match, because we've seen a few of them, and they are really long and grindy. However, the comparison between the two lists, the France minor and the US minor, I think it could be interesting. I mean, we've already seen it once before, but, um, things could change. Maybe Jking would be able to just squeeze it out. Unlike the previous match, but we will have to see.
And I want to add two thoughts about the tournament as a whole, and Noen's in particular. Is this Soviet-US ramp deck? I think this one is probably the weakest deck in his lineup. He's brought this 3, 4, maybe even 5 months in a row now. He's been tinkering around with this. He's made card changes here or there. It's very similar to his German-US deck that everyone else says is bad, but no one is convinced, and he keeps bringing it over and over and over, and it gets results for him, even if it does look bad to other players. I think this is just the same. To me, I don't think this deck can really measure up to Soviet France or German Italy, which is sort of another point I wanted to touch on. Is something I just realized is there's not a single German deck in this entire tournament, and if you said that 3 months ago, everyone would have said you're crazy, and that's wild. Not just because Germany's bad, because Germany's not bad, but just people have flocked to the Soviet control now, whereas it used to be these German-Italy control decks. However, I think no one has a lot to prove with this German-US deck, because it won a very, very close match in his quarterfinal against Head, against Head's Soviet France control, but I think there's a lot to be said about the quality of Head's play on that deck and Head's build of that deck, and then this Soviet-US deck lost twice in a row in his semifinal match. So, quite a bit to prove with that deck.
And you're, Jking, going to have the opportunity to put your money where your mouth is, right? Because you're going to have to defeat this deck, assuming we get there. So we're going to jump right into this third place matchup here and see if Jking can squeeze ahead of Berto Burrito in the ultimate point ranking here.
And game one is going to be US Frontline versus the Soviet deck. And this is a pretty good matchup for US Frontline. However, if you're knowing you want a hand that looks like that, that is something to be said about Noen and these sort of pocket pick decks of his, is he just, I don't know if it's actually something he's doing differently in the mulligan, or if the reason he stays on these decks is because he always mulligans well on them, but he always seems to find just the cards he's looking for, especially those single copy of cards in the deck.
I've never seen him not hit the one of Mobilize in any tournament game. That's crazy, dude.
And
oh well,
yeah, top deck Engineers Battalion. That's going to be. He doesn't actually necessarily need to play it. He could play the Bloody Sickle. Now, because of 30 seconds effect, of drawing an additional 30 seconds from the deck, it's not going to slow down the threats. However, it could stop a potential 35T. And yeah, I mean, Noen top decks the only one cost unit in his deck. It's an elite, and it's easily the single best card in his deck against mine. And I top deck a second 32nd, which means I have just drawn one less card than I would have otherwise. So yeah, that's about how you expect the opening of the game to go.
Yeah, better player wins. But also, it's worth noting that with your build of the deck with island hopping, it puts you in a much better position to go into this Engineers. Because Blitzkrieg, you deal a whole bunch of damage in one turn. However, island hopping, it grinds out value. So if your opponent has more health, then, it's not good for you, but it's still, more value to grind out. And it keeps being useful.
And with the recent change to patrols, overall in the meta, I'm running 2 patrols rather than 2 dive bombings, say 2 or 3 months ago, is the ability to remove smokescreen allows you to get to these Engineers and actually kill them a lot faster than you would otherwise. And Noen here, pretty happy he has the mobilization, because otherwise his hand's starting to run out of steam. Not having those 3 copies of Scorched Earth, not having those 3 copies of Winter Warfare, 2 copies of Winter Warfare that we see in a lot of those Soviet France decks, it is going to struggle to deal with several threats in the front line. However, 2 5th Rangers and 2 72nd Guards, those are all 3 cards you're very happy to see in your hand now.
Yeah, that's the rest of the value he needs for this entire rest of this game.
Sherman comes out, though. Gets me a handful of additional cards, and the Stars and Stripes in hand means that this Engineers can be killed if no one commits too much onto the board. However, I think no one has played this matchup in particular probably enough times to keep that in mind. And I mean, it's not a great turn here because you really want 8 credits. You really want to do like 2 5th Rangers or a 5th Rangers T60, something like that. Instead, you're on 7 credits. You do have to make some choices.
Yeah.
You can do 5th Rangers, another Bryansk.
I feel like that play is pretty powerful in this position.
No one rather choosing to go for the Heroes of the Soviet Union, except the train, which if there was no Hellcat, which we don't see, well, we see in my hand, there's not a Hellcat. Armored Train works out really well. Naval Brigade also would not be a terrible choice.
Except that it does fill up the support line for the Stars and Stripes.
And
that's really big.
That might have been a bit of an oversight by Nolan, because in his head, he's thinking, okay, I'm not going to play 2 units. What am I doing this turn? Gets the Armored Train on curve, and it's amazing. He plays it, but the 1/1 token spawned by that Armored Train means the Stars and Stripes goes up to 4 damage, wipes all the units on the board but the train, but it brings the train down to 3 health, meaning it can be taken out by the 5th Rangers, which also survives. So a lot of people like Sickle because of the draw it gives you, but here we see Winter Warfare would be much more optimal in this situation. However, no one has neither, so Partisans is the only way to remove this 5th Rangers effectively.
Why play 1 Winter Warfare when you can chain together 4 Sickles? Yeah, this is a really awkward spot. Not sure if I love the Partisans play. I don't feel like you have as much pressure to remove things as quickly without Blitzkriegs in the deck. You could even do something a little more passive, like a Bryansk and a KV, that presents some difficult things for your opponent to deal with. But simply going for the Partisans on the Sherman, spending an extra 2 credits to get rid of a 4/4 instead of a 2/1. Which is very reasonable.
And this is one of the downsides of Blitzkrieg, because if I still had Blitzkrieg in my deck, simply just a Hellcat plus a Blitzkrieg is 22 damage. And with 7 cards in hand, that's not an unreasonable possibility. However, knowing Blitzkrieg's not in the deck, no one can afford to play a little bit slower, allow me to have units in the front line, because he knows that he has the stats that if he survives long enough to play all of these stats, he has the stats to eventually push me off the board. And here I decide, well, I don't have Blitzkrieg, but I do have 2 half-tracks, so we're just going to go all-face. No one does not have any AoEs. The Sickle draw, though, is quite good. It's going to be able to take out a 32nd, and it finds a second Sickle, which is going to be able to take out another 32nd.
Can we get the last Sickle in deck off of the Sickle?
However, playing the second Sickle will actually put Nolan down to 7 credits, and most of the cards in his hand that he wants to play cost 4, so instead he decides not to play the second Sickle. He instead does T60, 5th Rangers, takes out...
But after the last Sickle on top, then you have exactly 2 credits to play the Yak.
And here, there's a lot of the We Can Do It and the 2 Red Devils is going to mean that I'm going to have control of the front line for quite some time. However, there is going to be a incoming wave of constant guards, and these 5th Rangers are going to be able to pick through these units regardless of their health.
And Jking definitely hoping that Nolan does not have a 39th in hand to steal that PIR.
Yeah, especially after the PIR self-buff. However, no 39th for Nolan. Instead, he plays another 5th Rangers. He's going to take out the 30 seconds, or possibly the 35p. You're not afraid of Sherman.
Well, you are afraid of Sherman. It's just that killing the U.S. units in the front line doesn't prevent Sherman.
This is true. Instead, he just plays down the KV, and here I have a few options. I can take out the KV with the Hellcat if I want. I can also instead just ignore the KV, play a We Can Do It. If I do play We Can Do It, I can trade with the 5th Rangers or with the T-60. And I decide that, if he wants to spend 7 credits playing and attacking with the T-34, he can go ahead and do that. I'm just going to build quite a big front line, and at this point, from my perspective, I'm thinking, well, this isn't looking great because he can remove the PIR, and because it's self-buffed twice, it means I don't actually have that much threat on the board. However, no one makes 2 very big mistakes here. The first mistake, which goes unpunished, is playing both guards on the same side of the HQ. This was mentioned earlier in the tournament with Azzy, I believe, playing around this perfectly, where he put the 2 guards on either side so that if a patrol comes out, and there is 2 patrols in my deck, it can't remove guard and everything goes face. Because in this situation, with a patrol, I can simply patrol the Bryansk, it removes guard, the 272nd is now no longer guarding HQ, and I can just go everything into the HQ. However, the other mistake he makes here is just simply by going for guards. You haven't seen any patrols, you haven't seen any half-tracks yet, but you know your opponent doesn't have a Sherman. So I feel like at this point you should just remove the highest threat unit on board because there's no blitzkrieg, so you don't have to be worried about too much potential burst damage. And instead, I take out the Bryansk, retreat the 272nd, that's a huge tempo swing, and go face with everything.
So to be clear, you would have gone for the 272nd Red Banner play last turn for Nolan?
I think I would have gone for the T-34, kill the PIR, and then I think you have the credits left open to Red Banner the KV.
Interesting. In my mind, I was thinking the 272nd and Red Banner, which is a higher risk play, but a much higher reward. And I feel like this game might be in the spot where that's what you had to do already by that point.
Potentially. He goes for the sickle and Red Banner on the KV to get the guaranteed guard. However, he makes the same mistake again. 2 guards on the same side. However, it doesn't need a patrol to be punished. Simply a half-track is going to be enough to put this away once I do some math.
Once he does some very simple first grader math, but you gotta double check.
And then I do take some time here. If you've not experienced 272nd guards before, when the Joseph Stalin spawns in, it shifts around because the HQ slides to the center because there's now there's fewer units on board. However, the Stalin then spawns, and for a brief second, the Stalin covers where the HQ appears on screen. So if you attack too quickly, you attack into the Stalin. I have lost many a ranked game to attacking too quickly after trading out a 272nd. So kill the 272nd, wait quite a bit of time, and deal the lethal damage. That is game 1. Not unexpected. US mid-range taking it over the Soviet US.
On stream, it really looked like you waited for a long time and then killed 272nd and then immediately killed him. So I don't know. Jking coming in with a bit of a gaslight to try to make it seem like he took so much time to play around that effect, rather than the truth in that he actually just took that long to count.
But we're now on to game 2. It is Jagro versus this the Soviet-US, and this is arguably even a better matchup than before. However, Nolan still with exactly the hand he wants to see. Going second with the sickle into the War Machine into a healthy hand of guards. I played the Type 93 on turn 1, just in case there was a sickle. I assumed there was going to be a sickle. No one kept 3 cards in his mulligan.
I do not like 5th Rangers. I feel like double Bryansk stabilizes, and then you play 5th Rangers. I don't feel like you can afford to let this damage group when you have so limited healing in the entire deck.
the only healing in no one's deck is that Engineers Battalion, and Heroes of the Soviet Union potentially get a second Engine Battalion. And neither of those two cards are in hand, so this damage you're currently taking is damage that's going to stick to the HQ. You're now on 9. You have to be worried about cards like Shiden, Desperate Measures, Signal Regiment, these cards that can deal chip damage even through Guard. Well, Shiden can't deal damage through Guard, but this potential burst damage even if you stabilize the board. And here the two Bryansks come out, and this is no one's idea, is if he does 5th Rangers first, he can do 2 attacks with 5th Rangers. Takes out the Cavalry Regiment rather than the Yokosuka here. I'm not a huge fan of that necessarily, because I think if there is 2 more Japanese Blitz units, that 3 attack difference could actually be quite a bit on dealing 3 damage to a Bryansk. Raiding Brigade top deck is very good for me, however.
Yeah, and you do have a pretty good chance to have all those Blitz units after playing the Dina as well.
Yeah, and we see Owen's cards are starting to run out. These T60s are another 8 health of Guard. However, 8 health of Guard is not a whole lot against Jaguar that's able to deal with these units really efficiently, whether it is with double surprise attack, Sendai, just even trading out is... It's not that hard to get through a 4 health unit, especially with the Type 93. And because they come in the form of 2 different units, if a Desperate Measures comes out, suddenly Desperate Measures can deal 10 damage to the combined across the different units and HQ of No One. And now No One does take out the Yokosuka, but he's left in a significantly worse situation, and it's difficult to see a way back into this one for No One. It probably requires a 272nd, maybe, and no Sendai.
Or for you to have not drawn Raiding Brigade.
Yeah, if we go back a couple turns.
What a high roll.
Panzer H comes out,
Ooh.
finds Signal Regiment, and that is the power of Panzer H in Jaguar. It does let you get to... Everybody talks about the elites in the Soviets or the elites in Britain. There's a decent number of elites in Jaguar, so a card like Panzer H that lets you cycle through all these cards, which are 2-ofs, 3-ofs, 4-ofs, to get to these very important elite cards is very powerful.
What you don't see, though, is Jking putting both Sendais on the bottom of his deck.
And here, knowing that no one has a very limited HQ total, but could potentially remove Signal, I decided I'm just going to trade in to these units now. And my win condition here is, well, one, I have a 50-50 on Errata to find Fane, and if Fane goes off, the game's almost as good as over. Or, if it's Desperate Measures, I might just simply burn No One down with Desperate Measures plus the damage from the Signal Regiment. However, No One with 2 more T60s is certainly putting up a fight, and if he's able to survive through this pressure, especially with a well-timed Hammer top deck for the Signal Regiment, and Feigned gets played and he manages to draw a KV, suddenly things could turn on its head very, very quickly, because KV after Feigned plus maybe 5 damage from a T34 push-up could very, very quickly turn this game on its head. However, that's a lot of ifs. First Rifle's top deck's very good at staying alive, but that's not going to stop the damage coming in from the Signal Regiment. 39th Rifle match
is a bit of an answer, but it's kind of coming down a little late.
Yeah, that's a very great card to find. Unfortunately, because he finds it off the mobilization rather than just having drawn it at the start of his turn, it means he can't play it this turn, which means the Signal Regiment stays on board. Maybe he wants to take the Aichi, that stays on board, and is able to just go past these guards. And with Type 93, that's just lethal.
Yes, it is. The bomber goes face, and you just trade off your 3 other units with whatever you want to.
And even without that, I had a 50-50 for the Desperate Measures draw off the Errata after trading in 3 of those units. However, Type 93 makes it a little bit cleaner.
Well, you still could have tried for the Errata lethal first for BM if you wanted to.
This is true.
You want to tilt your opponents with the 50-50.
And, I mean, No one's Soviet deck now down. Loses again, and I'm up to nothing in the series. And now I just have to win with Soviet France. And no one, knowing this, of course, decides he's just going to bring Brit Air. This is by far his best deck into Soviet France. This is probably a 90-10 matchup for no one. And especially if you have a hand like that, that is a very solid hand.
I don't even understand how you win this game 10% of the time, because like you don't even have Scorched Earth, you don't have any 52Ks, you run only 2 Defend in depths. Like there's just not the answers, I feel like.
I mean, it requires Air not having to play on turns 1 or 2. And then if you can hit down a Petliakov, that does slow down this Air deck quite a bit.
If they get 3 surprise attacks in hand, 4 casses, and double Lend-Lease to brick their hand entirely, you can slowly beat them down with a 3-amp and a second Rima. I don't know if I agree with that being a 10% chance of happening, but...
And here we see Winter Warfare takes out the Type 94. That's just to pick it off, stop a potential turn 2 Cass, to turn it into a 2-2. And I mean, no one probably double checking the deck list, saying my opponent doesn't run Scorched. Why? And then decides he's just going to throw out an HMS Illustrious because there's no punish in my deck for this. There's no support line clears. There's no AoE damage, no AoE op cost buff. I mean, other than Winter Warfare, but you've already seen one, and even if that is played, that's not doing a whole lot. So even without cast, this Type 93 is going to let no one start pouring on the damage.
It looks like he's opting to deal the 5 damage to HQ rather than getting the Spitfire online. I kind of like the Spitfire, to be honest with you. It's still really hard for you to deal with, even if you... Yeah, because Defend in Depth wouldn't even do it when he plays it out. It's a lot of pressure.
The reason he might have held back on the Spitfire is, I mean, cards like this Bryansk, where if there's enough guards, it can just slow down the Spitfire entirely, essentially making it useless, and now it's a card on your board that you've committed there for the potential winter offensive in the future. There's less room for you to have bombers on the board. You've committed 4 credits, not dealing 4 damage, and playing this unit that might not do anything if there's just guard after guard after guard. But if there is no guys, it's definitely just going to let you end the game in about 2 turns. So
yeah, there's not a whole lot of guards on 4 that the Spitfire particularly cares about. But, you know, no point in being nitpicky when the game's already over. So
yeah, it really doesn't matter what no one wants to do here. He goes for a double Albacore, hit face for 4.
Sure, really... you could have done 6 different plays there without it changing outcomes, I feel like.
With surprise attack.
That is like probably the best draw in your deck, to be fair.
Yeah. I mean, with Parasite, Type 94 for the second surprise attack, Cass in hand, you have my 1 of Yak for the fighter. You could deal a ton of damage to that, potentially even lethal damage. I don't know if you have the credits for that, but 39th here.
The best card in Jking's deck in this situation does not prevent lethal on turn 7. So
yeah, and a little bit of a misplay by me on the placement of those. You see, I have to do 39th for the mobilize, leaving my HQ unguarded. And we see no one actually top deck Monty on that turn, so we could have fully locked the support line again if he wanted to. But of course, he instead just does close air support, lethal, and I mean, air collects its free win. And now he decides he's going to bring his Soviet deck again, go into a Soviet France mirror. A Soviet control mirror against my Soviet France. And this is a matchup he won against Head earlier today. And at the very least, it's going to go on longer likely than the Jagro versus this ramp deck or the frontline versus this ramp deck.
A matchup he won against Head earlier today and wins again right here and now.
I mean, his hand's certainly looking like it might do that because no one once again finds the turn 2 War Machine into the turn 3 5th Rangers. I think he's done that every single game.
It's that easy.
Yeah, I feel like it's the decks that don't run a lot of ramp. It's like War Machine's the only ramp card in the deck, and they sometimes even run like 2 or 3 copies of it, and they always find War Machine on 2. But if you're like a dedicated US main ramp deck, you never find War Machines if you full mulligan for them. But we see this is going off to a similar start as the head No One game did, where No One ramped up and started to put on some early pressure, whereas Head used spy rings to start developing research. Unlike Head, though, Head had the US research, which allowed him to start building down towards nukes. This is quite different. This is the British research, which, I mean, not going to do a lot. This is easily the worst research in this particular situation. Now, obviously, it can be very good to get that extra healing against Jagro, but the upper levels of British research not particularly helpful in a control mirror.
Yeah, you might find an opportunity to synthetic rubber a Briansk regulars at some point in the game, or something similar, but that's quite a while off, and no one is putting things down that you need to deal with in the here and now. I also think it's worth mentioning the hammer onto the the how do I forget the name of this so often?
Fifth Rangers?
Yeah, Fifth Rangers. Would be really powerful. Jking would be coming ahead on tempo, using 1 less credit, dealing with the Gret in the front line, but it's also one of the most important cards in the entire matchup for him to keep around and use effectively. For example, on this KV.
Yeah, and when I chose to keep that, I was looking through the deck list. I was looking at cards like KV, the 272nd, a potential 8/8, 5th Rangers, and looking at Owen's hand, I'm very happy I chose not to play the hammer on that turn, because we see that is he has the KV, he has the 272nd, he goes for the Heroes of the Soviet Union, and this is an interesting choice.
I like IS2 here.
Yeah, he doesn't run the Winter Warfares, but IS2, you don't need Winter Warfare for IS2 to be really good, even if it's just taking down a single unit, just a more expensive, slightly larger naval brigade. That's perfectly fine in this type of control mirror. And the first rifles, it's such a good card, but it's not a good card in this situation where you don't have the same snowballing effects as Soviet France with the Rima.
Not trading? I think he must have missed that you would have milled if he trades out with your Polycarpov.
I'm not entirely sure. It might be that he was scared of giving me the From the People, because it sets up Winter Warfare From the People to fully clear the board, maybe.
Not impressively, but
I mean, it's also Noen. Noen loves to go face. He loves to put on that pressure. He sees he has the KV in hand, he has the 272nd in hand, and no one knows this matchup. He know that this is a matchup. Actually, I realized I was misremembering before. It was he played it against Head and he won, but he played this matchup against Umoy and lost. Umoy went for the Dukes and was able to just remove No One. And we saw it in that game. No One tried to play very aggressive. And I think that's his approach to this matchup, and I think that's a correct approach to this matchup, is Soviet France will eventually, because No One's deck does not run a lot of card draw, and it's running a lot of these cards for sickles, for machines. He's got a Confusion, 2 Ural Factories, where it's like these cards that are very, very effective, but they don't have a lot of impact, whereas the Soviet France deck just has so many units, and they're not necessarily the biggest units. They're not 8/8 5th Rangers, they're not B-17 Flying Fortresses, but there's just so many of them. There's a constant pressure that No One will eventually lose a very grinded out matchup, so he has to go on the aggression.
I suppose. I still think you would want to aim a little more towards playing this deck more like a US to Germany mid-range in this matchup, where you are trading efficiently for as long as you can, and you recognize the key moment where you need to convert that into a win.
Yeah,
when you're at your strongest and they're at their weakest on the board.
I would agree with you on that, and especially seeing the engine battalion on the board. Like, there's an argument maybe that if you force the call to the colonies for healing, or maybe you just put them under pressure and they don't have the call to the colonies, so you can get like a fast, cheeky win. But seeing the Engineers Battalion on board, it does certainly call into question the choice to try to go for this aggressive line, especially knowing the number of guards in this deck.
And I have a question. Why did you feel the need to trade in the first rifles? I have a feeling I might know the answer already, but I'd like to hear from you.
What health was the first rifle set? I'm trying to remember the
situation.
It
was that one defense.
Yeah, okay. Basically, the reason was I wanted to get the damage in case he did sickle into it, because there's nothing really in his deck. He has a single copy of Hammer that he could potentially use to remove this 3/4. But there is 4 sickles in the deck. Also, there's the possibility of Partisan's Ural, Partisan's Red Banner to take it and then get the 3/4 plus the extra body for a pretty big tempo swing. And just lowering the... No one has no way of increasing the health of his units, so lowering it to 3 means that even if it does... he manages to clear everything. It means that if any of these bombers die from the people can take out this 5th Rangers.
Did you remember that his 5th Rangers has Blitz, so that if he sickles and then trades, it would be down to 1 defense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
For me, that's enough reason to not trade, but I understand the reasons to do so.
And here, I mean, we see the synthetic robber having an effect. British research, even as the worst research in this situation, research is still incredibly powerful. Unfortunately for me, no one has the Confusion Ural factories. Now, this is not nearly as bad as if no one has the 39th, but those are both single copies of in the deck.
And I love that little tutu popping out. Hooray! When you are not happy to see him back. Just like, oh, whatever. I guess that's like probably around average, but...
Yeah, there's certainly better to cost US units, or Soviet units. There's probably certainly worse. Not a lot worse, maybe, but...
I believe that happy guy is called the 75th Rifles? Or something similar to that.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Which is crazy that I can remember that on the spot and then stumble over 5th Rangers.
Yeah, it is funny how certain cards have a way of sticking with us. Like the 0-cost 1/1 Blitz is the 554th Rifle Regiment.
Yeah, I mean, he's just such a happy dude. And I've got a self-damage geared brain. It's one of my favorite decks of all time, and I wanted to make him work. And I think he's still a pretty good card. Although I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that he's worth putting into the self-damage deck.
Looking back at this game, I mean, the reason Berto and I have not been talking about the game is very, very long turns to accomplish very, very little. This is the Soviet control mirrors, where every single time you play a card, you have to look through your opponent's entire list and think, am I going to lose the game 25 turns from now because I played a card on this unit now rather than saving it for this unit later? Like, what's the tempo advantage I'm going to get by playing this removal now? What are the potential threats I could play it on later? Or if you're playing a unit, what are the potential tempo answers my opponent could play? Am I trying to bait out an early piece of removal, or should I hold this unit back until I can bait out a potential piece of removal they have in their hand? And, I mean, we're both practically at full health. We both have very large hands. So this game is going to go on for quite some time. And here, Doan going for the 272nd Red Banner. And this is sort of putting the chips out on the table. Because this is very, very powerful. And there's not an easy way to remove it. Seeing the Petlyakov on board means that I can't play Naval Brigade. I can't play ISU. So if no one just doesn't trade out that unit, I can't trade it out for me. And if those are my only ways of removing Stalins, then suddenly no one is pushing very, very hard. And that's sort of going back. This is no one's preferred strategy in this matchup, it seems, is just go for pressure, go for board presence. And there's the ISU and the Naval Brigade in hand, both stopped by this Petliakov.
Yeah, but you can play Winter Offensive and IS-2 next turn. It's actually not crazy to play Winter Offensive and like a defend in depth. You are healing for 6. Okay, it's pretty crazy, but like you can see where the thought process is. Anyways.
So yeah, I would say it might seem pretty crazy, but that's also exactly what I go for. Since I really like the position it puts me in. It takes out one Stalin. It leaves the other one at 4 health, meaning I can clean it up with the Naval Brigade. I can clean it up with the ISU. I can even clean it up with From the People T-34 if I want to. And I do sort of cash in on the healing from my engineers. I kill my... But I know the amount of burn in no one's deck. It's not too much. So it's a calculated risk. And otherwise, there's not really a way to deal with those Stalins, and he's not going to trade off the Petliakov. So I think if I wait any longer, I go for any other play. I think it's just going to leave me to doing the same play, but with less health.
Yeah, it sort of felt like if you don't go for that line, then you're depending on no one making a mistake to win the game, which is never what you want to do.
No. And I mean, I've dropped from 20 health with an engineers on a huge board to just 9, but I mean...
But your deck has healing in it.
Yeah, there's...
Other than engineers.
This Soviet France control just has so many guards, so much removal. These Call to the Colonies you can choose to use as healing or draw. It means that it's so difficult to push this deck over the edge if you're not playing like a dedicated aggro deck, where you have cards like Signal Regiment that are dealing constant damage, or your air, where you just have a huge board of bombers that can't be dealt with. If you're just trying to use conventional ground units that you play and then you attack with, it's so hard to pressure Soviet France out of the game, because as a result of putting on pressure, you are making worse trades. You are spending more credits of moving and attacking than you are developing the board. So if you aren't able to end out the game, you're just going to be in a significantly worse position. And then that's where Soviet France starts playing down the Rimas. They start giving everything mobilize, and suddenly the game's completely turned on you.
Do you like this line for no one? Because I was kind of thinking I was thinking I might have liked to B17 first, see if you get the 50-50. But there are a lot of high value targets in your deck, but it is also so much stronger of a play on this turn.
That is something I've been sort of thinking about this entire tournament, really, is I don't think I've seen no one play a single B17 this whole tournament. That could be wrong, but it seems that he really just holds them back until the last possible moment. And I don't know if that's him waiting for the combo with Ural Factories, where you can turn it into a Pershing or a B17F, or if there's something else he's worried about, because I don't run Ural Factories in my deck, and they still 11 cost US units, so it can't be punished by me doing a Partisan Sweat Banner play. And
I was thinking it's more about him trying to kill Joseph Stalins on your side, trying to have enough things to do that. But he played the Naval Brigade there without too much issue, so...
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what it is, and I mean, this is... He's been able to build up a huge board. I went for the Spy Ring, double research into US, and this is sort of my favorite positions in these control games, where you can really know what your opponent is going to have access to. Where you can say, this is the max possible burst my opponent can play this game. So this is what I have to be worried about. I'm able to take these risks, drop this low on health, in favor of, in this case, developing research. There, a little bit of unintentional DM. I played Heroes of the Soviet, or I played Winter Warfare, because I'm doing Winter Warfare ISU to clear, and then I realized, oh, I could actually do Heroes of the Soviet Union. Because I'm going to have 2 leftover credits. Might as well play it now in between.
Imagine if you play a IS-2 off of the Heroes of the Soviet Union.
I mean,
it would be a misplay. It would be a misplay. You're giving no one information, because he's probably not going to assume that you're just trolling. But it is really funny.
And here, no one has the choice of, do I deal 6 damage or do I roll factories into it? And he's going to take another Stalin. However, that defend in depth top deck, very, very clutch. That's going to let me take out the Stalin with defend in depth plus from the people, which is expensive. However, no one is running. He's kind of running out of threat. I mean, it's hard to say he's running out of Partisans, a B-17, and an ISU in hand.
And a mobilization off the top. I need to stop calling those out because I've done so well today to call out top decks. And
that is not a mobilization. He sure wishes it was. And here, it's once again an interesting position because you can play an ISU or you can play a B-17. These are units that are going to be able to put on a bit more pressure. However, it's not going to be enough to set up any immediate lethals on board, so you can't stop me from developing nukes. And then if I develop nukes, it means you get another round axe with whatever you played, and then you're going to lose them to the nukes. So is it possible to set up any potential 3-turn lethals with a Partisans maybe? Or like a 5th Rangers or a T-60, something to generate another threat after the first nuke. He decides he's going for the ISU.
I think of how aggressively he's played it, this is pretty reasonable in how to go, because, he's sacrificed a lot of value already. He needs this aggression to work out for him. He's starting to stumble a little bit after that defend in depth top deck.
And I'm kind of curious why he went for the ISU rather than the B-17. It might just be because it has higher attack. But again, he's still holding on to this B-17 now out of Ural factories. It's not a holding it on for a combo to turn it into a bit of extra burst damage once he gets a bit more credits to work with. And I mean, B-17 is destroy one random target. ISU plus Sickle in hand is destroy one target of your choice, and potentially more if there's some unit trading going on.
And this is a lot of damage in Jking's hand. It would appear that you're just going to KV and Phony War him quite soon, although you might need to use another nuke beforehand.
Yeah, and at this point, I was looking through his deck list, and I was just...
Surely he doesn't have the B-17. Is that what you're going to say?
No, I was looking through his deck list, and I was like, okay, the ISU is from Heroes of the Soviet Union. I don't have to worry about that. But I'm just like, he's played the KV, and the Heroes gave him an ISU. But I'm like, is there somehow I lose if I play the second nuke to bring him to 6, and then next turn I just do KV Phony War?
That would be B-17 Ural factories move up Persian, right? Would be the punish.
Yeah, but I'm trying to I'm going through the checklist. I'm like, I think he's played all his Ural factories.
Okay.
And even if he did, he wouldn't have enough credits because that's 11 credits, and then Persian's 3 operation cost.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so...
Well done, then.
Yeah, I was going through this long list of checks of just okay, I don't think he can get a Persian. I don't think he can play another KV, which means a Phony War would kill me as well. I don't think there's a way that he can somehow heal. I don't think that there's I guess the one thing would be mobilization and then pass, so that his hand size is too much for KV to draw enough with Phony War. But I feel like I'm still just going to win in that position. No one knows the game's essentially good as over based on how I played. He knows it's going to be the KV, the Phony War, taking it 3-1 over Noen, and that means Noen just lost 5 consecutive games with this Soviet-US deck. Now, it doesn't necessarily matter for this immediate tournament because he's already booked his ticket with his performance over these past 3 months into the OCC Ultimate, but I'm going to be very curious if Noen decides to bring this Soviet-US ramp deck again in the Ultimate.
Don't tell him that. He might be against me round 1.
Does him playing against you in round 1 mean you feel like maybe I should have submitted that deck list?
That Soviet US deck we saw, it did take wins overhead, and I think there's a lot of room for Noen to just play on it. I think there's a lot of room for him to change some cards in and out, whether to improve its effectiveness versus control or aggro. There's a lot of flexibility in the deck itself, so we could see Noen. This could be Noen's pet project that he works on, and brings a new version of it to the ultimate, or maybe that performance just makes him say, okay, scrap this. Everyone's doing Soviet France. I'm doing Soviet France.
We will find out in just about a week. Congratulations, Jking. 15 points for you, 12 points for Noen, 0 points for Berto. So I do believe by very, very unofficial math, that puts you exactly 1 point ahead of Berto in the standing. So feel free to rub that in. It seems like based on the last series, you have absolutely got your BMs on point. That was awesome, though. I do love the insight of like getting to hear your thought process through a game like that, especially because obviously during the game you don't have access to your opponent's hand, and now you're looking back at it going like, oh, this makes sense now, or no, I still have no freaking clue why you did that.
Yeah. The funny thing is, in the actual game, the ISU, I'd completely forgotten that he just doesn't run ISU in the deck. Like, I'd written down, okay, he played an ISU, and I was pretty sure the ISU was off of Heroes based on the position in his hand that it came from. But I was like, I remember when I was doing it, I was like, maybe I somehow messed up the position, and that was the ISU he runs in the deck, and he still has a KV in hand from the Heroes of the Soviet. Now, watching it back on the cast, I realized he doesn't run ISU in his deck. That ISU was obviously off the Heroes of the Soviet Union. I had nothing to worry about, but either way, it worked out.
Just like, sorry, just like when you were playing against Vinny and playing around his secret comet the whole game.
Yeah, played around Comet the entire game for several games in a row. He doesn't run Comet in the deck.
For somebody who's so good at crossing off things that like your opponent plays, it is hilarious to me that just this invisible comet happened to escape your perfect logic. Oh my gosh. Well, congratulations, Jking. Big win there, finishing in third in this clash. Noen in fourth, so you kind of punched your ticket, probably finishing top 5, top 4 even in the 8 going into the ultimate. So we will see you in action next week. Unfortunately, you will not be able to join us on the cast. Neither will you, Berto, but it has been an absolute pleasure having both of you with me today. And we bid you adieu as we jump into the finals in just a few moments. Stay tuned for Jinlin against WWII. Welcome back, everybody. It is time for the finals of the April OCC clash. We have WWII taking on Jinlin in a battle to determine who's going to win this last clash before we get into the Officer Club Ultimate, going on live next week. A huge 2-day event, a historic 2-day event on Twitch and on YouTube. We're going to crown the first ever Ultimate Champion. But before we get there, we have one last matchup for you. I am joined by Bubbles and Flake. Let's take a quick peek at the decks and really get right into this. So that, we get right to the action. We've seen Jinlin's list before, but Bubbles, why don't you give us a quick rundown of exactly what to expect here?
So this time it is a pin deck, not a Bridair deck. Like I said, at first glance, they can often be confused with one of each other. This deck is quite popular among certain people. It's quite a specialist deck, but those players that like it, love it. And obviously Jinlin is no exception, bringing it and getting all the way to the finals with it. It's quite an interesting deck. It's quite good against, things like USA mid-range. It's not terrible against Jackro because you do have quite a bit of healing and ways of clearing the board, but it can struggle to close out games. And then this particular version does struggle against things like Bridair because you have things that target ground units or delaying tactics, which is frontline units. And then next, he's got a Soviet Japan South damage deck. This deck used to be really quite popular, especially pre-nerf. You could sort of get these huge units down really, really early. The 34th Guards used to be 6k, and now they're 7k. And, because you reduce their cost by 2, that essentially slows them down by an entire turn. So it has been nerfed a little bit, but it does still see a fair amount of play. Some interesting things to look at here is the counteroffensive in this deck. This can do a huge amount of damage out of nowhere with Winter Warfare. It can sort of be like Blitzkrieg in the sense that a non-threat unit can suddenly end the game on the spot, as well as Ura, which operates quite similarly to Blitzkrieg, giving all your units a large buff, but that can operate from the back line. It is a little bit slower because it doesn't have this credit reduction on attacks, which Blitzkrieg does have, but I personally see the cards as somewhat similar. And then obviously this Japan Feigned Retreat Jagro deck. We've seen this deck a fair bit in previous tournaments. I'm sure you've seen this deck on ladder and climbing the ranks, and this is no different to that. Something interesting it does have is this Marder free. Not everyone goes for the Marder. It was teched in for a little bit, as you try to typically only have 2 to 3 orders in the deck, so you need your draw engines and your ways of doing things to come from units. You know, you've got like the Sendai, the Raiding Brigade, units that have ability like orders, and Marder sort of fills that role, so that's why that comes in here.
Right on. So this is going to be a best of 5. There will be no bans, much like the third place matchup. So that Brit list is going to go through. Doesn't matter if it's pinned, doesn't matter if it's air. We are going to see it. Let's see what Uwumoi is bringing to the party here, Bubbles.
So Uwumoi, I think, has possibly the 3 most popular decks of this event. You know, Brit Air still being very, very popular. I think 4 out of 8 players bought Brit Air. And then this USA mid-range deck, we had 7 out of 8 people bring this. And then this Soviet-French deck, we actually had 5 out of 8 people bring this. So these, I think, are the 3 sort of most popular decks. We have seen some variations on these. You know, the US mid-range deck that Jking brought, for example, taking a little bit more for Brit discard. And, you know, there's this Soviet-France deck. We do see a little bit of changes in how heavy some people like to go in it. Some people like the tractor factories, some people don't. So we do see a little bit of variation, but I think these 3 decks are generally the most popular 3 decks of the tournament. And I think it says something that Uwumoi brought the 3 most popular decks and is in the finals. I think these decks are popular for a reason. They're really, really strong. And not just strong, they're good against the popular decks. You've got some decks which are really good at clearing, you know, lots of decks on ladder. I think Jagro is a good example of something that can, you know, generate a lot of points quickly on ladder, but isn't necessarily great against all the tournament decks. I think Jagro is going to struggle a little bit here, especially against sort of Soviet France control. So I just think it's interesting, though, that Moi has brought the 3 most popular decks and has had, so far, a lot of success with them.
Definitely feels like these 3 lists are becoming a little bit more and more of that standard tournament lineup that we're going to see as we inch closer to that ultimate event coming up next week. Flake, anything specific you're expecting to see here in these finals?
Well, when it's a finals, typically, again, best of 5 and not best of 3, you have to be prepared for everything. And a lot of players sometimes will just prepare and say, well, they'll prepare for everything but the inevitable outcome of maybe getting to that finals, where you do have to face everything. Oftentimes, like we mentioned in the previous days, where you're going and you're building your lineup, you're saying things like, well, I can't beat this, so I'll ban it. But now you have to beat it. But so does your opponent. Your opponent has to beat your best as well. So you also have to make sure that you're now playing the game of, when do I position and play this OP list, or this very powerful list? Do I throw it out first? Do I throw it out last? Is it my last bastion of hope? How do I do it, and where do I position it? So again, another layer of prep and another mind game scenario of figuring out what your opponent is bringing in against you, and when, now that you have access to this powerhouse list, when do I play it? And do you the worst case scenario is that you throw it in against a deck that it becomes almost like a free roll. You don't just want to pass it through, but you could probably assume that the players are going to be very careful about when they play these British lists.
And we've often seen them lead with those British lists and each get a win, and it essentially turns into 1-1. Great, we both got our Brit out of the way, might as well have banned it. Let's do best of 3. And let's find out exactly what the players are going to be kicking off with as we jump into this first game of the April OCC Clash Grand Finals. And no Brit to be seen here.
Yeah, they're opting for a different strategy here, which is, I guess, maybe feeling at their opponent, because part of it is also, when you want to bring that Brit list, if you win the first game, you know now that there's a 50-50 chance of playing it against something else, going first, going second. Some decks want that side of the coin, as it were. So you're basically playing the first game to see, okay, if I lose, I have two. There's two decks that they're going to play against me, and maybe the one that's out of the way now is the freebie, and then you're maybe a little bit more, free and clear to play the powerhouse list. But as it is, I mean, here comes the hot and heavy start as it's 2-1. The infantry just blitzes to the front, and again, the pressure of Japan, and then again, just dropping that German unit into the back line to just, again, refill the hand consistently. It's a nasty reality, but it looks like Moy has a nice little follow-up response here.
So this is typically quite a good matchup for the Soviets. You've got a lot of healing, a lot of guards, a lot of defensive capabilities, and you do have lots of pings like the Sickles and Winter Warfare. However, this 22nd, which is going to draw a lot of cards, so it's drawing a card every single turn, really, really shifts the dynamic of this matchup, because now you sort of have to find a way of dealing with this draw engine in the back line, or you are going to lose just by resources. Your opponent doesn't need to pop Feigned, they just simply have more resources than you.
So take a look at this. Again, another Irregulars is just going to hold court and just protect that HQ, and with the Engineers just shrouded in the back line under smokescreen, this is going to be a tall order for Japan. It looked like such a strong start for Japan, which is very easy. I mean, we looked at the deck list distribution and what was there. 30 cards of the 40 were 2 cost or 1 cost. Like, they were just low to the ground. So having those ideal openers are not rare at all. But it looks like Moy here has a pretty good defense, and dropping in with the Petlyakov, having a bomber and stopping some deploy effects, this takes out the Sendai regiment as well.
It also prevents the Arado from searching the deck for like Feigned Retreat or the Desperate Measures, which is, I think, a fairly large consideration of how to use this card. But I'm surprised we don't see Uemoy trying to take out this 22nd. We almost see him doing the reverse and saying, okay, you can have that draw. You're going to have to dump your hand, and I have like ways of dealing with everything you dump. So it's very interesting to see Moy not trying to pressure taking out that unit and not trying to do anything about it. It's certainly a different way from how I'd play the matchup. However, that does certainly not make it an incorrect way of playing the matchup.
Signals in the back line again under Shroud. It looks like those every nation seems to have one of those 1-drop shrouded 4 operation cost utility units. They're kind of just helping out everything else, as it were. One is going to deal damage to the HQ, the other one's going to heal it. So the difference is the 1 damage dealt versus the 2 healing. It's outclassed. It looks like Moy has the upper hand here. A Bloody Sickle is a nice point click delete here. I love that draw here. It's allowing you to also just go ahead and cycle through your deck a little bit. And the bomber as well. The difference is you can always drop the Deuxième Rima to just go ahead and, shore up some of that defense and put another fat body in the way. But it looks like he's opting to get rid of the signal regiment in the back line here.
It's also interesting that we see this Dina be moved to the front line, and this prevents the front line from being, slowly whittled away by this bomber. Very nice play here going for the Scorched Earth. This protects the bomber. It means, you can trade into my guard with one of these units on board, but that's not good enough if you want to kill the bomber. We could see the Desperate Measures trade come out. The Shiden is a perfectly sensible play as well. The sooner you get this down, the sooner you have the credits to start, attacking every turn. 1 or 2 attacks every turn with this can really rack up the damage very quickly.
And look at how quickly this has become very, very difficult to get through now. And a second guard is going to help out over here, but there's going to be no attack made because everything is super expensive on the front line as well as in the back line. As that bomber operating for 4, it's pretty nasty. This isn't a US deck. No one's hiding a bolster in their back pocket to just turn any one of these super expensive to operate units into a nightmare. But Desperate Measures going to go ahead and follow that up with a bombing raid potentially. The question is the way that these are spaced out, are you looking to get rid of the bomber, or are you looking to get rid of the engineers?
I think often the engineers are a very high value target. However, considering the cards, the hand size here, I wouldn't blame going for the bomber. Going to focus down the engineers. The main advantage to fix down the engineers as well is you don't just prevent healing, you do actually get 1 extra damage on the HQ, which is just a nice little bonus. In these matchups, every single point of damage can matter. If this naval comes down, it will just be a 4-4 ambush. You do not get the deployment effect, as this Petliakov is dual-sided. It affects both sides of the board. Neither of the player's opponent's abilities do work. So it's just saying, I need to get a 4-4 ambush down. Now, a good way of dealing with these is the Type 94s. You get down to these pin effects and you take it out. But the problem is their deployment effect is obviously shut down by the Petliakov. So it's a little bit of a difficult problem for Jinlin to face. But also, he might not need to face with it immediately. If you look at the board situation, Urumoy is still on the back foot. They have a very, very strong defensive line. Oh, but the Akita proc taking out the bomber, a 1 in 3, and this puts it.
Could have been actually. I was gonna say that could have been a chain. Like the way that you could have approached this is if you could have taken out the 4/4 guard here, it would have cost you a lot of units. But you could have, if your objective was to get rid of the bomber, you could have sort of shored up those odds by taking out the guard first and turning it into a 1 and 2 option to take it out. But it looks like luck was on Jinlin's side, but he is just owning the board, has a handful of options here, and is just crushing face here. What is Moy looking for here? Is it Endless Winter? What is he hoping to find to just equalize this matchup?
Yeah, I think either of your winter cards, Winter Warfare or Winter Offensive, would do the trick on helping you clear the board. But neither of them are particularly perfect. If you get this Winter Offensive, the big one, you then do 4 damage to your own HQ in a burn-based matchup. And if you get this Winter Warfare, that just tickles a lot of the units like the Shiden and the Dina. So either Winter card isn't perfect, but they would help you a lot. It's not an ideal situation. You could try and get some research going, but you really have to make sure that you're going to be able to slow down the game for long enough to get one of these payoffs. It's a little bit of a situation for Urumoyi where it feels like everything you take, every road you take isn't ideal. It's sort of trying to make the best of a bad situation.
Meanwhile, the 5/5 guard does have mobilized from the Rima from a couple turns prior. It is growing. If you want to address it, it feels like it's a situation where you might want to address it sooner than later to give it a favorable trade, attack into it, get rid of the ambush, and then maybe throw some bodies at it. I mean, Jinlun's not hurting for board presence. He's got a handful of options here, so he's clearing up some options here. Okay, well, it's still growing. It's definitely still growing, and he's going down the research route. He finds the British branch of research. Do you take radar here just to give yourself another card, give yourself a little bit of more cushion?
I think you may have to take radar here. I think you may not have much choice. And Urumoy is probably thinking similar, where I have this 6/6 ambush. This is really nice. It's growing. What the hell is Jinlun going to do about it? But actually, if you look closely, there's 2 Sendais, I believe that is. And there is 3 Type 94s, which can spawn in this surprise attack to just clear it off the face. So I imagine Jinlin's game plan is just going to be, let it grow as much as you want, let Urumoy get overly comfortable with its existence, and then the moment you want, it seems like maybe right now is the choice, the time to go for it, you can just remove it from existence and just sort of blitz out face in somewhere Urumoy wasn't expecting. Especially since you have 2 Sendais, you can actually get rid of both of these guards and just, you can really put the hurt on.
Well, when it comes down to it, I mean, yes, the mobilization and the ambush unit, the more it grows, Sendai's just going to take that off the board, and it's going to answer that option. And then you're thinking, all right, Moy's going to think along the lines, okay, that's gone. Let's just drop some synthetic rubber on this guard, and hopefully that's good enough. And then another Sendai regiment might just go ahead and answer it. But it looks like right now, the option is just to go ahead and double surprise attack, and killing the 6/6 that was such a threat and holding on to the Sendai. It might be a situation, Bubbles, do you think, where perhaps he's holding on to the Sendai just to sort of surprise and say, all right, goodbye, guards, and now we can push forward and just close out the game?
I think a really interesting thing to look out for with holding onto the Sendai is turn 10. Because on turn 10, you can play 4K to get rid of a guard, and then you can hit face twice with the Shiden. Urumoy, I don't know if they see it or not, but there is, in fact, lethal on board next turn for Jinlin. You push up these Type 94s for 0k, you go for the Sendai, you can do 10 damage to face with the Shiden and finish off with these 0 operation cost tanks. So it's going to be really interesting to see if Urumoy heals up a little bit to try and play around it. or if they sort of just falter on that, go for the research and play a little bit too slowly. So it's going to be very interesting to see if Urumoy recognizes the potential threat of a Sendai being lethal. You do know Jinlun runs 2 Sendais, so it is definitely worth playing around with your Urumoy.
Is there a situation here where you synthetic rubber your fighter and just try to take out the opposing in this brilliant dogfight-esque kind of situation to perhaps clear out that potential, that threat in the air? Or is it just merely a situation of let's just shore up our defense here?
I could certainly see that being a good option on dealing with the Shiden. I don't think you're under too much pressure if you put this other guard down, because once you put this other guard down, the Shiden becomes far less of a threat. And once you've taken away its bonus attack by taking out the Type 93, you can still go for the rubber trade in a future turn, because the Shiden now has 4 attack instead of 5, so the ambush still isn't a problem. So there's definitely a potential option on how to deal with the Shiden when you need to, but I think if you're deploying another guard, you can let that Shiden just sit for a little bit longer.
All right, so we're getting some work done here and pushing through. The Sendai Regiment has taken out one of the bigger threats that they're going to have, that Urumoy had access to, but there are some options here perhaps to go ahead and gain some of the defense on the HQ. You do have an opportunity to do you could go synthetic rubber, you can heal a little bit, and you can go ahead and attack with your fighter to take out the opposing air superiority here, because that Sendai Regiment, you want that off the board, but it is hidden under smokescreen. What options does Urumoy have to take out the opposing Sendai Regiment?
I think going for the healing and the trading is definitely the best option for this turn. And then taking out the Sendai looking forward, you do have this Red Dawn. Typically, you're going to want to use the 4 credit version where you research it into a From the People and then use From the People to take out the Sendai. However, a big concern is units and cards, they come in right to left. So if you take out that Sendai, that guard isn't going to be protecting your HQ. So what you need to do is you need to get it back in a turn where you can clear the unit to the left of it so that the guard protects your HQ once again.
And just like that, the board was razed to the ground and ultimately just rebuilt out of nothing. Jinlun has another even scarier aircraft just hovering about. It's not necessarily representing lethal on its own. However, it's a fat piece of machinery that you have to answer. And Urumoy now looking for opportunity to just get some health, dropping the liberation here, adding the resistance cards, gaining some health as well is going to help him out here. Now, how worrisome are those resistance cards in Jinlun's hand, and what option do you typically use? Are you looking to damage your own HQ and not peel cards off the top, or do you just ignore those cards altogether?
So it certainly depends on the situation a lot. Because you have a lot of HP and you're not under much pressure HP-wise, you can typically go for the burn option. The threat of fatigue is a very real threat when playing Feigned Retreat. You often find you end the game with sort of 5 or less cards left in your deck, especially if you've played Feigned Retreat, because you're just throwing out wave after wave after wave. You do burn through your deck at a real fast rate. So I think in this situation, you definitely want to go for the damage. You may want to clear them at some point because you're drawing so many cards because of this KI-83. However, if you look at the hand at the moment, most of these cards cost 1. So really, if you're going to spend, 1 credit getting rid of something in hand, you're better off getting a unit on board and spending the 1 credit rather than playing one of these resistance cards and doing the same effect of clearing a hand spot.
Once again, just cheap units, blitzing them to the front line and trying to just push through these nasty guards. Unfortunately, that guard on the board is going to drop a nasty surprise, a little Easter egg for everyone else, in the form of a 8/8 Joseph Stalin tank with 2 heavy armor. Now, it can only deal with 1 of those, so it can't exactly squash all the ants, but it can go ahead and take them out one by one. Nonetheless, Moy here, desperate for some sort of AoE to deal with all of this phony war, is going to be the right option here. I believe he's going to get the better end of the stick. Now, what does he find off this? Winter Warfare.
Defending depths are huge as well, because this offers you a way of taking out this KI-83. There's
Winter
so
Warfare.
much potential in Moy's hand right now. You're this Winter Warfare, like you say, that can clear all these one drops. You can go for the defend in depth, take out the KI-83, and if you want, you can even hit the Dina in the front line and finish it off.
Hovering over the Winter's Warfare, 20 seconds left. He's taking it out. Defend the depths is going to deal the damage necessary to clear the air superiority. And this game looks vastly different than it did not too long ago. But keep in mind, Bubbles, I believe there was 15 points of HP of a HQ defense gain of Moy. So he was on the brink if it wasn't for just buckling down and, bringing himself back into reality here. Feigned retreat.
Surrender. Just goes for it. So I'd like to point out the importance of this Petliakov and why Jinlin decided the game was just over. Very few cards in deck. Cannot deal with the guard, cannot deal with the board, and the Sendai, the Raiding, the Arado, these are all made dead by the PE. And Jinlin says, this is too much. I'm done. Let's just go to the next game. Save myself some sanity.
That's a smart move. I mean, why play, why have a fool's errand of trying to bash your head against the wall? Major props here to Moy, who kept his head above water for long enough because it was coming in pretty hot and heavy, and he managed to sort of just keep throwing bodies in front of it and ultimately finding the right recipe to go ahead and clear the board. But it's a brand new game now as Jinlin leaning on the Japan aggro list again with Germany in the back pocket to help out here. Moy now having access to the British list. So this is where the British list is going to come in. And is this the right recipe? Is this the right position that you want to have? Is this the matchup you're looking for your British list?
The matchup, I think, is about 60-40 in Brit's favor. However, with this hand and this opener, this changes to like 80% in Moy's favor. You can clear these early guys with the gladiators, and you've got this air superiority to kill the things which are a little bit more difficult to clear. On top of that, you have the swordfish. Once you've gotten rid of Jinlin's early board, you can then establish the swordfish, establish the Aichi, them up with Cass, and really just generate a huge problem. Now, we do see Feigned Retreat in Jinlin's hand, which is really, really powerful to get early on, not just because you have the option to drop it on curve, but it makes this a Rado. You're going to get a burn card. You can get the Desperate Measures or the Bombing Raid, so it gives you more room to play around that. But with Uemoy's hand, I think it's going to be really difficult for Jinlin. I think it's going to be an uphill battle. And even if you burn Moy quite low, you have the Raider from this Brit research to just give yourself a little bit more HP and wiggle room to move about in if you're Moy.
Looking to just go ahead and snipe down. This is why you have those planes in the sky. Air superiority dealing 3 damage to the tank and trading up with the infantry, met with another air Arado and some more blitz action. Why not? So, Moy, the longer this goes, I feel the better he's going to feel, as now a gladiator is going to meet his brethren in battle, I believe. We're just going to go ahead and close the air score.
Yeah,
why not?
Just pass and trade into the Arado. You're putting yourself in such a dominant position. Jinlin does have a few options of doing the Desperate Measures and trying to clear the board. But if you Desperate Measures and clear the board, Moy just responds with a Swordfish and an Aichi and says, what are you going to do about this?
Pressuring face again, no problems here. That's a nice card. The second para is very nice if you want to get rid of something bigger, paired nicely with both a Bomber and a Chianti, if my sommelierisms are coming through. Probably not, but it's okay. Are you dropping the Swordfish here and trading your 2-1 into the threat up front? Or
so,
are you...
Yeah, you drop the Swordfish, then you go for the Cass, and you use the Cass to take out the Type 93, and then you can freely trade into this thing in the front line. It's a little bit of a more complicated and advanced play to figure that out, but it's a route which gives you a much stronger position. Now, dropping the Shiden does create quite an uncomfortable position for Uemoy. Do I want to take 8 damage? No. I need to kill this. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Paracy come out, buff one of these fighters, and then use the other one to proc this ambush. So you proc the ambush now, you put down the Paracy on the other gladiator, and then get rid of this, just clear it away, and you leave yourself in a very dominant board position.
That was the best bastion of hope that Jinlin had against this board, because it was built up so simple, so early. And there's the Feign Retreat. Now the question is, what's the worst card he can draw off the top here?
The worst card you can draw off the top would be a bombing raid or a bombing run. This just puts you in a position where you're not generating these huge amount of units that you want, and could give Uemori the space to just burn out lethal with these bombers. Marder, not perfect. It doesn't have blitz and is high expensive. You want low cost and blitz so you can establish lots of stuff quickly. Jinlin not finding the perfect cards. However, will have another opportunity to do so next turn.
Yeah, it seemed like nothing lined up there in terms of blitz options, as well as the cost was not lining up. Leaving a credit on the table there after the Feindra sheet doesn't feel great. Giving opportunity here to Boy to go ahead and expand on some of that royal research. Is it radar? I think at this juncture you're just looking to go ahead and hit some rubber on one of those bombers. It looks like that swordfish is going to be mighty gruesome. Sendai Regiment might be able to answer it, but these early game Brit Air, I can see why this deck gets banned so often, and I can also see why, unless you get caught with your pants down, Japan is just gonna get bullied by this list after turn 3.
I would like to give a quick shout out to Jinlin for following the well-established acronym of AFC, always feint on curve. Dropping the feint on turn 6 really gives you a far stronger sort of foothold on the board. It says, hey, you've got to deal with me quickly because I am going to draw cards at a far quicker rate than any other deck in the game. So it really just puts the pressure on your opponent. Uemori may have a really strong board, but they will see themselves as being on a clock because you will just get burnt out. Things like the Signal, which we see in hand, alongside all these sort of blitz out tanks, things like the Whirlwind. Some people even have Shinoto, and it just offers so much pressure that Uemori now has to work out how to end the game in a considerably quick amount of time.
When are you looking to just pop your AoE over here? This looks like a good time as
turn. Yeah, this is the turn. When you pop it now, it gets rid of the fighter, opens you up to go face, but also gets rid of the Signal, which reduces your chance of just being burnt out. Now, I'd really want to see this Parasiege to the front line, because what the Parasiege to the front line does is it means if Jinlin doesn't deal with it, you can then synthetic rubber and get a Fury guy in the front line, which is a huge amount of pressure. We do also see the Susi along with the Type 94. The Type 94 obviously gives you a surprise attack, which can kill a pinned unit, and then the Susi gives you a lot of ways of pinning lots of units.
I mean, there's very many options here for Moy to actually get it done. Synthetic rubber on one of the bombers as well. But a fighter in the back line, a robust fighter in the back line, is pretty nasty to deal with. So it looks like the synthetic rubber is just going to hit the front line and end it, but no, because we've got some. Okay, we're going to pin one of the bombers. You got to pin the frontline unit as well.
Just going to trade with the frontline unit. Get rid of the guy right there. Now, what's going to be interesting is, can Moy put on enough pressure? Because really, if you're looking at this from Moy, you've only got a couple turns left to sort of sort this out. We do have the Susi, and that can pin air units. It's not just ground units. So you can go Susi, but if you want to do that, you need to trade away your Type 94, because otherwise there's just not space on the board to put down the... You got to trade away the Swordfish, so that you can put your Type 94 down. So you trade the Swordfish into the fighter, you follow up with the Susi and the Type 94. Gonna just go for the rubber and trade. Perfectly reasonable way of doing things. You can also then go for the Albacore.
Albacore is nicely done over here to get and does 1 damage and pin, but if it's dead, hey, who cares? The question is there enough gas in the tank here for Jinlin to actually convert? Because it looks like it's going to be lights out after this if he can't commit. That's a good start there. Sendai Regiment is a nice one as well to pick up here to just go ahead and delete that 7-1 bomber. The question is he going face here, or does he actually want to trade with some of these bombers?
That's just game. You go face with the bombing raid in hand. Glory to the Empire. And this is what I mean with you drop this, even without the Type 94, there was burn in hand as well. If you drop this feint on turn 6, unless you're really screwing yourself over, this is the best way to use feint retreat. It applies so much pressure so quickly. Moy, we saw how much of a strong position Moy was in, how strong of a start Moy had, but drop feint on curve and you apply so much pressure so quickly.
Into game number 3. This is
Mulligan, not keeping anything.
when you don't keep anything there, you got the 30-second infantry. That could have been a disaster here. Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Too soon. The caster curse comes in hot and heavy there. All right, we're going to draw another one. I wonder if he draws the fourth one. Do you think he draws the fourth one because we're cursed like that?
I wouldn't be surprised. Mathematically, it's unlikely, but oh my lord! Oh no!
Baby, I feel responsible.
I think we owe Umoy a formal apology. Lady Luck is not on his side, as he says, and just goes for the surrender. I have to respect that. That takes some cojones to say, you know what, this is over. I'm done with this game.
Now, I don't agree with that in general, mainly because you're on turn 2. You have 3 units in your backline. Is it really that out of the realm of... You had a 2-drop, you had 3 drops, you had a decent curve over there. To concede that early is kind of questionable. Maybe he just wanted that Soviet list out of the way. Who knows? Ultimately,
I think that surrender may have been more eagerly taken based on the fact that Moy has a guaranteed spot in the ultimate at this point.
I think that could be part of it. Sure.
And oh my god.
Well,
what are these 30 seconds doing to him? But also... the game was essentially over at that point. I don't think anyone can disagree that the game was essentially over because of Winter Warfares. Now, we did see Winter Warfare in hand. Umoy obviously did not see the Winter Warfare. So personally, I would have waited, and once Winter Warfare had been dropped, I then would have surrendered on the spot and, maybe chuck my computer out my window or something.
I mean, that's the more baller way to do it, I suppose. Or frankly, Bubbles, I see you more as somebody who would, because obviously you're very wealthy. You're Britain's version of Jeff Bezos. Like, you have this vast empire of wealth. I see you more so like getting some sort of massive helicopter, bringing your PC into, like, flying it into the middle of like the Bermuda Triangle off of like some airship carrier, and then just dunking it in there. That, like, what else are you going to do with your vast amounts of monies, Bubbles?
I mean, what is wealth used for if not wasting it on throwing things into volcanoes and triangles?
Basically. I mean, that's when I was young. That's how I convinced my parents to buy me cards. Like, that's the way to do it. What is this money for if not to live in a box in my closet? Like, let's get real. Moy now moving those 30-second into the front row over here, getting a nice... a bunch of meat shields over here in the front line. It's going to cost 1 credit if the Honey wants to trade into it, which it does. It's getting some work done. Why not? And we're going to just pass on over. It looks like a lot of orders in Jinlun's hand here, giving Moy a nice little opportunity to go ahead, trade with the Honey, and still have 3 credits left over to
I want to see this Sky Train. I know there's other routes, like getting the pier down, maybe getting a Warbler into the front line, but I really wanted to see that Sky Train, because the quicker Sky Train is on the board, the more value it becomes. Like, this card, if you can drop it turn 3 and Nick stays alive, can win you the game, and often will win you the game on its own. So personally, I would have liked to see the Skytrain come out there. Obviously, there are threats, ways of killing it. You've got the naval power and the surprise attack. But generally, if your opponent is spending 2 credits and 2 cards to kill a Skytrain, that's okay with you. The card, while it could have won you the game, you have plenty of other ways of winning the game. You are okay with that trade.
Moy now taking advantage of the fact that Jinlun basically just got time walked twice, did nothing, absolutely nothing for 2 straight turns, made a trade, and then basically walked away with 5 credits left there rotting. Moy taking the opportunity to develop the board further, the 507th, again, sprinkling some love all around the units on the board. Got some some tanks in the background. Again, the mobility of the tanks are great here, able to just, again, move and attack where necessary, relatively cheaply there as well. Naval power pinning, gaining some extra life here. Is this the opportunity? Is this where you want to play? We can do it?
I would say most likely, yeah. I think your board is going to start being at risk soon. You may want to greed out and get 1 or 2 more units down first, but considering you have 2 of them, there's a lot of logic to using it pretty much immediately. You could, 5th Rangers and then move things up to the front line, try and get a little bit more pressure first. But the risk is, if you have too many units down in the front line and they're too buffed up, you're just going to be pinned and delaying tactics over and over and over again until eventually you get Commonwealthed. So I sort of feel like another advantage of this We Can Do It is to try and find cards like Blitzkrieg. You do get the cycle as well. Because I see it very difficult for Moi to really get many drops on Jinlin. He's never really going to get the drop on Jinlin unless he can find a Blitzkrieg in an adequate time frame.
So the slander you threw at the 507th was taken to heart. As you can see, the buff to the power has been distributed relatively equally. So you can apologize now, or
maybe it's something to do with the alternate art. Maybe it's the alternate art PIR only. You know, the original one's a really nice guy, buffs everyone, is always out there for everyone. But then you slap on that alternative artwork, and he's just buffing himself all the time, doesn't care about anyone else anymore.
Well, if there's ever a time that We Can Do It, it's now, as the entire backline has been basically stapled to the to the HQ. But they're getting a nice little upgrade over here. And
oh my god, another one! There's another naval operation. You can pin the whole backline again. And another one! This is 3 turns that Umumoi can't do anything. You talked about Time Walk earlier. This is a Time Walk in the truest sense. You are spending 2 mana and your credit, and gaining an extra turn.
Look at this, and We Can Do It again. It's like, oh yeah, well, we could still do it. As these units have become massive. What's the outcome here? Because pinning them to the back and just keeping them off the front line and keeping them away from your HQ, what's the ultimate goal? How do you punish this? As another naval operation, again, just nails them to the boards here, just saying, nope, sorry, we'll try it again next time, and I bet you don't have another We Can Do It.
So you try to get these units down. You try to get the Type 94. You try to get anything you can, just that can do inklings of damage, just tickle face a little bit. And then what you want to do is you want to try and get Umumoi below 21 health, or to 20 health or lower, at which point you're then just going for Commonwealth and ending the game. So there's the Wellington. That's a really, really good pickup because that's going to allow you to burn this HQ down to 20. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw almost everything in the backline get pinned. We're going to see, like, you know, pin this, pin that. You can leave the Red Devils alone, pin everything else, move up the guard, and then just try and hit face and try and get your Commonwealth off as soon as possible.
Nasty, nasty business over here. As you know, the writings on the wall, the deck lists are open. Both players know precisely what they're up against, what those long form games are, where we're getting. There's the Commonwealth and the Churchill. Even if there's, you know, some way of slowing down the Commonwealth, which I don't believe there is, unless you fill up your support line, get hit by some AoE or something, you know, strategic bombing could buy time. It doesn't matter. You're just being hemmed into your support line. There's a Churchill. This is over. Look at this. Everything has just been, like you said, just made absolutely inadequate, punchless, just sitting there on the sidelines. They've all been benched, essentially. They're spectators in this matchup, just waiting to get to that position. And Churchill! Adios. Look at that. They're all gone. What a brilliant matchup.
That was just slaughter. Jinlin just had was just playing with his food for that, just pinning him over and over again in the backline. This is the pin deck at its best, and Jinlin taking an OCC Clash victory, and, you know, rightfully so, is going to be seen in the OCC Ultimate and may give it another go. We may see this pin deck again, I believe, next week.
I swear to God, playing with his food is probably the best analogy you can think of, because frankly, it was just this massive buildup as the 507th continued to just give love all the way around. The We Can Do It's making for this gigantic crescendo that never actually occurred. It was approaching this zenith, but just got snuffed out by pins and an ultimately this Churchill play into a full hand. It is incredible. What a matchup that was.
That was, you know, it's only slightly disappointing that Jinlin didn't get to win the tournament by actually playing Commonwealth, because we were probably a turn away from it. But that was a phenomenal matchup. It was 3-1, but it did feel like Jinlin had a pretty solid stranglehold on most of that once the comeback with the Jagger deck in the first match was concluded. Felt pretty good, and I'm really impressed by Jinlin and their ability to kind of take it all home here. Going to be some great momentum going into next week's Ultimate.
That was great. That was awesome. Again, as soon as you let the British lists fly, but that Japan list that managed to just weather the storm and find it. it's incredible what these decks can do, and the fact that Britain was banned pretty much almost entirely throughout this entire tournament, and finally gets to shine, but then loses to a deck that can really suffer under those bombers just buzzing overhead. So congratulations to Jinlin, because he took it quite masterfully.
Absolutely, and there you see the final bracket. So Jinlin finishing in first with that 3-1 win over Uwumoy, who showed up, and both of these players needed very solid performances today to guarantee their spot in the Ultimate next week. So we've seen them both do that. Jking versus Noen, you saw that third place match of Jking taking it, finishing third, cementing his spot as well, and Noen's in a good position for next week's Ultimate. Bubbles, you seem to have something you want to say?
I'm not gonna lie, I felt a little bit left out on stream, and I went and got something to feel a little bit more like, what are the boys, what are the people at home? And I went and got my little Canadian flag to sort of fit in with the broadcast a little bit more, and it felt appropriate.
Since Europe kicked you out, you can come to us. We're a very welcoming country.
Who's your favorite hockey team, Bubbles? You could tell us now.
That's a good question. My favorite hockey team.
I can see Google.
My favorite hockey teams.
He's gonna find he's gonna Google random hockey teams. He's gonna find some some mosquito level double A team from from Muskoka.
Muskoka Rovers.
My favorite hockey team is definitely the Canadian men's national ice hockey team.
The British national hockey team, or you say Canadian men's national hockey team? The
Canadian national hockey team. That wasn't the first result on hockey teams when I searched it.
What was it? The first rules?
Yeah, this was the second result.
What is an offside? Enter. Okay, gotcha. Bubbles, we will make sure that you're well equipped with the proper right team to root for, which frankly is the Montreal Canadiens. It's the only team that you should be rooting for, right, Chris?
That is absolutely spot on. There is no other team. None of them matter, but the Montreal Canadiens. And speaking of, the Canadiens, a team that has won more Stanley Cups than anybody else, we have a huge event coming up in just 1 week, and we know who the top 8 is going to be. We are going to see Head, Jinlin, Noen5, Jking, Uwumoy, Berto, Tiger, and Leo. That is our top 8 for the Ultimate. You'll get the whole points breakdown and all of that if you go to kards.com/kardsOCC points. I'm sure it will be spread across the interwebs, so you can take a look. You can start doing your fantasy bracket, figure out who is going to take this first ever Ultimate home in just 1 week. But thank you so much, Flake. Thank you, Bubbles. Was a pleasure. Jking, Berto as well, doing a phenomenal job here this weekend. Thank you so much for tuning in to the April OCC Clash, and don't forget to check out next weekend the first ever Officer Club Championship Ultimate. Have a great day.